Hello, all. Tonight I'm reviewing yet another vampire movie, but this one's more modern, and I hadn't heard of it before. Again, I found it on Tubi. It's referred to both as Bram Stoker's The Curse, Dracula's Curse, or just Dracula's Curse. It's from 2006, and it was written and directed by Leigh Scott, who also plays one of the characters in it called the Old One. Um, Very interesting movie. It stars. There's so many people I can't list all of them, but and that's one of the problems with the movie. I'll talk about that in a minute. Principally, Christina Rosenberg plays Countess Eilzabeth Bathory. Uh, Eliza Swenson plays Gracie Johansson, who's one of the main characters. Thomas Downey plays Rufus King, a vampire hunter. Rhett Giles plays Jacob Von Helsing, obviously another vampire hunter. Thomas Troy plays a character called Orlok, and that name, Orlok, is a parody of the name of Count Orlok from um Nosferatu, which was another version of Dracula. Um, there are Leigh Scott plays the Old One, as I said. Erica Roby plays Christina Lockhart, who's an interesting character. Tom Nagel plays Rick Tattinger, who's sort of a uh, kind of a sidekick character almost. Um, Jeff Tanton plays Rafe, who's another vampire. Um, Sarah Lieving plays a very sexy vampire named Alex Devereaux. Uh, Anastasia Ravenwood plays Maria Westbrook. Sarah Hall plays Sadie McPherson. And Rebecca Cochan plays Trixie McFly. And I don't know if that's a joke on Back to the Future, but that's her last name. And those are all three vampire hunters. Um, it's kind of a story about there are vampires and vampire hunters. In the beginning, we see the vampire hunters kill a couple of vampires, and then the Old One kind of summons them. There's the vampires have something called the Council, which is sort of a high council of vampires who decides what they do. And they invite these vampire hunters to meet with them on neutral ground, and they want to sign a truce. They say that they'll stop killing humans and feeding on humans if the vampires stop hunting them. Um, Although the humans are kind of skeptical and they don't believe that the vampires are going to keep this pact, they go ahead and sign because they're tired of doing this, and the vampires are obviously tired of being hunted and killed. So they enter into this pact with the Old One, and who is blind and an albino, and that's the character played by Leigh Scott, who wrote and directed this movie. Um, it was produced by David and Michael Latt, who produced a lot of these types of movies, and he also produced that movie that I like, Sumeru, from 2003. But I digress. This movie, like I said, there's this pact, except that in the second, that's the first act. In the second act, the vampires kidnap this character, uh, um, Christina Lockhart, played by Erica Roby. And the reason that they kidnap her is they think she's a quote unquote a pureblood. Purebloods are, they can be humans, but they're people who carry the blood of Dracula. They pronounce it Dracula. I think that's kind of a attempt to make it sound like the original Hungarian or Wallachian uh, pronunciation, but it's a little stilted, and the fact that they say that so often is kind of becomes annoying. Um, there are a lot of characters, and it's very difficult keeping all of them straight. Both the vampires and the hunters. There's like 30 of them, and I couldn't keep the names and the faces and everything. One of them's like a cowboy, and another thing that kind of contradicts standard vampire canon, but it's not entirely bad, is that apparently in this, vampires can be killed with conventional weapons like bullets. If they bleed out enough, they'll die, or they'll become so weak that they can then be staked. One thing they do not explain whatsoever, and I don't know why they did this, is that vampires' blood is green. I don't know, maybe vampires are supposed to be like Vulcans. Their blood is made with copper instead of, iron. But I don't know why they did that. That came off as a bit silly. Also, all the stakes they used look like chair legs. That was, it's, maybe they did use chair legs, but they all look kind of corny. Um, some of the special effects are not bad, though. Most of them are pretty cheesy. Anyway, there's Countess Bathory, who is based on the historical Countess Eilzabeth Bathory, who was a Hungarian countess who lived from 1560 to 1614, and allegedly was a serial killer who murdered young virgins and bathed in their blood because she believed it kept her young. That is covered more in the 1971 Hammer movie, Countess Dracula, with the very gorgeous Ingrid Pitt. But in this, she is, like I said, she's played by Christina Rosenberg as sort of a femme fatale character, and all of her disciples are rather good-looking women. And she's going to take over, and wipe out the human race, and find through the last of these purebloods, who, when they drink their blood, they gain the power of quote unquote the master being Dracula, and they inevitably there ends up a kind of a final battle between the vampire hunters and Countess Bathory's people, although as Gracie herself said, Gracie has gone off after the initial pact, and she's not a vampire hunter anymore until her sister is kidnapped by the vampires, and now she wants to take revenge. In doing so, she shoots up a whole bunch of vampires in this bar that they hang out in, and accidentally kills a human being as well. She's very upset about that, and doesn't want to do it anymore, but she realizes, as anybody would, tells Rufus, they're obviously walking into a trap. Well, that was rather telegraphed, but they go to, confront the Countess Bathory at her lair, which is all, in red velvet and dark and kind of cool looking. One thing I'd like to mention, the lighting in this movie is very bad, and it's very difficult to make out a lot of small details. Maybe that's just the copy that is available on Tubi. It was very dark. Didn't really like that. I like the soundtrack was pretty good. The soundtrack was done by a band called the Divine Madness, and sounds pretty. It's a pretty good, interesting soundtrack. The movie is very talky. It's very slow. If you're expecting a rollicking action adventure, this isn't it. There's a lot of bad stilted dialogue, like was it when when Rufus puts back together the hunters? He says, I'm putting the band back together." That's a pretty cliched line. He says something about to Van Helsing about why don't you trust the vampires? He says, "I'm a Van Helsing. It's in my blood. In my blood." That's a bad joke. I noticed some other things, some other bad dialogue, mediocre acting, and stilted dialogue. Some of these people, it seems like they really can't act. They're saying their lines like, in a monotone. But most of them are pretty good. The principals are all good. Thomas Downey is good as Rufus, and Rhett Giles is good as Jacob Van Helsing. In the end, there's a confrontation between Rufus King and Countess Bathory, and he says, you pretend that you have all this reverence for Lord Dracula, yet you don't bow in his presence. She says, "That's because Dracula is dead, and I'm taking over." And he says, "Or maybe that's just what you think. Maybe you think Dracula is dead. Maybe he really took over, became hid as a human being, so he could erase the curse that he started." And then you see that he transforms. The vampires in this thing can do something called mind walking, where they can touch you and see into your mind or project something into your mind. And he does that with her. And then he becomes the real Dracula, who is no longer. You had seen a scene, the earlier scene, where he turned her into a vampire in the 16th or 17th century, but you didn't see his face. And then now they show it to you, and it's Rufus's face. And then he becomes the real Dracula. He takes on a kind of a demonic form. He looks like this special effect I thought was really good. The makeup was great. He turns into basically, first he's just the standard vampire with the pointed teeth, and then he starts transforming more and more into like a demon who's gray, and he has wings, and he has hooves like the devil, and becomes basically a humanized bat. Sort of like the character in the DC Comics Man Bat, who's an inversion of Batman. But he becomes this man-bat, and she says, I'm taking over now. And he says, no, you're not taking over anything. And he destroys her, turns her basically into basically brings her years on her, so she ages into a skeleton and dies. And that happens both in the dream and in the real world. Then he goes back, he reverts to being a human being again. And he admits that what he was really trying to do all these years was the reason he became a vampire hunter was to erase the curse that he started that he never wanted to start. And he says at the end, it ends with the same line at the beginning. It was Walpurgis Night, April 30th. And I thought that was really good. It's interesting. It's definitely a different take on the Dracula story. It is not, in fact, based on any of Bram Stoker's stories. And the only thing that really relates it to Bram Stoker is the use of the name and the character Dracula. Otherwise, it's not Bram Stoker's anything, really. But well worth watching, and an interesting independent Dracula movie.